The Robodebt scheme did not have algorithms within it that allowed for any self-learning over time. They were very, very defined and specific to achieve a very specific goal.
It's a pretty rigid, limited scheme.
It's extremely rigid. It is, once those rules have been coded and set in place, the system itself stays in place until a human comes in and changes the rules that have been put in place.
Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright, and joining me today on Kaurna Land is my fellow South Australian public servant, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And recovering public servant, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
So one of the sleeper issues in Robodebt is the robo part of it. We've already heard that DHS took issue with the name because it wasn't fully automated, and in fact there were heaps of people involved.
Thousands.
But the Royal Commission report includes a very interesting chapter on algorithmic decision-making. Caroline, take us through the key issues.
Look, so Professor Darren O'Donovan, who, by the way, I'm desperate to get on this podcast, so if anyone knows how to link us in, send us something on our email, said after the report that one of the most important recommendations in the report is a forward-looking one about the publication of algorithms used in automated decision-making. And, whenever he says something, I think, yes, he is super smart, he's really across it. I've got to confess, when I read this section of the report, it actually left me really cold and unsatisfied.
How come?
So it discusses these kind of key legal issues, like what is a decision? And if a decision is made by a computer, is it a decision that's reviewable under the ADGR Act or,
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Alison is super
I'm excited about this. And can we use my favourite word, judiciable?
I was feeling similar. I'm like, oh my God, that's such a good question.
So this is not what today's episode is about. Sorry, ladies. The reason I think why it left me unmoved is because it hadn't done the first bit, which is connect me to what actually was the ungainliness of the automated decision-making process in Robodebt. It's like this kind of ethereal, abstract discussion about, oh, yes, of course, you could use data to make decisions and these are the implications and they should be transparent and lawful. But actually, when you think about what was happening in Robodebt on the ground, it feels so far disconnected from this idea of AI that, they could not bring the two ideas together.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
So let's go back to basics. Airplane crash style, which is my favourite. Love an airplane crash investigation. What were the sequences of things, step by step, about how the computers made the decision?
So, look, the first and most important point of this is that Robodebt is not AI. So it's automation, which is something simpler.
Yeah.
And the best way I can describe it is automation equals data plus a business rule and you get an action, right? So,
okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like filtering my inbox with a rule.
Oh, yes. Or like the way I auto-forward emails from some people to my junk mail. Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant, obviously.
Oh, yeah, that is what you meant. Oh, that's hilarious. I really thought you were talking about a proper thing. Yes, so in this case, it's data, ATO, Centrelink data, plus a business rule, if this, then that, to an action, your calculation of entitlement, first letter, second letter, debt letter, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the automation process. And look, we heard about the business rules and the challenges of business rules in the Frontline Culture episode, and we will get to that a little bit. But I did want to start with data because, data sounds simple, right? Get ATO tax records.
Bing, bang, bong, done.
Here we go. Put them next to the records you have for the people at Centrelink. The thing is that actually takes heaps and heaps of work.
Yep.
I'm so glad you guys think that because some people think it doesn't take a work and I just think they've never done a mail merge because do you think?
Absolutely.
Gold example.
Well, because it's really hard, right? Because you've got to clean that data because the first thing to say is the data has been captured by humans who are invariably unreliable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's an individual at a point in time.
Yes.
So
super important.
So in 10 years' time, that information may not be correct anymore. So
Absolutely,
your
'cause the
life
data-
changes, your name changes, sometimes your
gender changes.
can change.
But even you can just misapply, right? I once got an electricity bill for several thousands of dollars and had a panic attack. They'd written down the number from my neighbour's meter, not from my meter.
What was your
wow.
neighbour doing?
Oh, it's just the gulf between the number my meter was at the previous read and the number their meter was at. But like it was just a simple,
Yeah.
he'd just written the wrong numbers in the wrong box.
Yeah.
And how
So-
often does that happen?
When I took over our admin and was working with my husband to do his first tax return, his 2 letters of his name were inverted.
Yep.
11 years. Wasn't until I got a really good accountant that we got his name in the right order again.
Adjums.
And it was literally that when he was like 17, either they'd inverted it in the typing. Remember you used to do
Yep.
it in a tax
Yep.
pack that
Yep.
came and you got it from the newsagent and you
Yep.
hand wrote it?
Yep.
So it took 12 years to get those 2 letters turned back around.
The first passport I was ever issued misspelt my name.
Oh, wow.
And I had to send it back and say that's no.
Double L's.
Double L, double D.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I think so to do this data matching, you have to clean the data in the
Yeah.
ways that we've talked about. I think the other thing that we always forget is that data is usually captured for a particular process.
Yes.
Right? And that context, which doesn't exist with the data when you suck it out, is actually really important. So my hypothetical example here is that you might, for example, have the number of siblings that someone has on file, because you might record that for Family Tax Benefit Part 37B, where you get that if you have X number of siblings under 5. So, you would have for that person how many siblings they have.
Yeah.
But only for as long as, if they're under 5 at the same time
Yeah.
and blah, 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 blah. But that's not written in the kind of column on Excel spreadsheet, right? Like it's just number of siblings.
Yeah. And there's not like a ... that says, till we have another one.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course. People have more babies. I mean, power to them.
Sure, not me, but
That's right. So there's this huge amount of cleansing that's needing to happen at DHS, and then there's a huge amount of cleansing that needs to happen at the ATO, and then they bring these 2 data sets together and they compare date of birth, name, and address. And then they make a decision, right? And this is not the policy people, like the nerdy wonks make a decision about how comfortable they are with getting the wrong match.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it turns out if you're a twin, say, and you're Katerina and you're Catherine and you're twins, you might have very, very similar records.
yeah.
Yep.
And, or if you're a father and son and you live in the same house and you've got the same name, all sorts of things.
So in my large family, there are three with the same initials. Not done on purpose, not a Duggar style thing. Just as it turned out, they just ended up doing that, which meant that the mail became a thing because it would just say initial last name and you wouldn't know
Who? Yeah.
which member of the family it was for.
Isn't it lucky we no longer get mail? So you have to make this decision about how comfortable you are about getting the wrong match. And one of the things that Dr. Aaliyah Worth, who's from Deloitte, who does a bunch of this kind of analysis for the Royal Commission, notes is that until 2019, ATO was just handing back detail of people that were medium confidence matches. So people that they weren't very sure were...
What, just excluded?
No, handed back to the DHS. So DHS would get...
It's probably a match.
That's right. So Katerina is going to get Catherine's salary data allocated to her, but Katerina's been on benefits.
Right.
Yeah, it's a problem. So even just here, you can start to see all of the different and ugly ways in which these data matching decisions, which are really invisible to the big bods upstairs, are making a really big impact on people's lives. Then we get to the bit where the real problem is that the data goes straight into a system that starts spitting out automated next steps. So if you've got junk data in, you're getting junk actions out.
And you're on the train now and it's moving.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that the Commission talks a lot about is about the kind of exclusions that should have been applied to this data. So always intended to be applied were that people who were blind and deceased shouldn't get this, but you were also supposed to exclude temporarily.
Deceased seems pretty obvious.
It does, although I think Danielle will tell you about how hard it is to find and know certainly who is deceased in your data record.
Wow.
Absolutely. It's also actually quite hard to get someone to be administratively deceased. And so I think I may be the only person who's ever been the executor of a will so far.
Yes.
You're not
in this room, not listening
Yes,
to the
not
podcast.
in history.
around the trestle. And it is actually quite difficult to administratively decease someone.
Wow.
And it can go on for years where you're like, I've already told you. Here's my paperwork. I've already told you. So I don't think even that is that simple, to be honest.
But at least they tried to do that.
Yeah.
What Dr. Aaliyah Worth discovers is that in addition, the whole time Centrelink is saying, and also we temporarily exclude people who are bereaved. How do you think they work that out? Yeah, exactly. Everyone's got very good confused face going on. I wish we were on YouTube. And people who are in natural disaster zones. But what Dr. Worth finds is she's like, I can never find anywhere where actually they built that filter in. So they just said it out loud, but no one
never actually
That's right.
tried.
But if you rang up and said, I'm bereaved, they'd say, oh, yeah, you should be excluded. But it didn't stop you
from receiving the automated letter.
That's
So
exactly
from
right.
getting on the train, which
From
was
getting
so
on the
hard
train.
to get off of.
Exactly right. And the other one that you hear a lot about, and this is just incredibly sad, is the vulnerability flag. So Reece Calzo, whose mum has been just an amazing witness at the Robodebt Royal Commission, and she did a really great episode with Rick Morton that's worth listening to. He should have had a vulnerability flag that meant that he was offered a manual assistance process, right? Yeah. And he didn't have one, and Centrelink lied to his mum about it multiple times, sort of didn't say that there was a problem with it. He didn't have one because actually what's the point at which Centrelink put a vulnerability flag on you? You don't, it doesn't just automatically happen. There has to be a process for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I'm quite struck by what the public service would have looked like a while ago in relation to data, which were records when they were in paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was your record. It was your record of having been to the doctor, or it was your record of anything, any interactions you might have had. And so they weren't pick-upable unless you had kind of a...
Yeah, they weren't aggregatable.
Yes.
No, and yet
They were just held by each.
and they were held, and then to use them you had to look at them. So you couldn't kind of suck them up and move them around.
Yes, out of context.
Out of context. And I have inherited functions in government that were still paper-based, or had gone digital only in the couple of years before, which meant that, and you hadn't digitised the archive.
Yes,
So
very common.
a particular type of licensing thing where the only way to keep the electronic system up to date was to go back to the cardboard, like to the boxes, and go back through the records. And not that we want to do that. I'm a big fan of never having to touch paper in my own life and at work and automating, etc. The reality is you lose something every time you do it because you do lose that record, and it now becomes data. So instead of being a piece of paper that it's an individual record, you are actually a cell in amongst many thousand. So there's something weird for me around
the transposition of individual to group.
Yeah, and what you lose, sometimes what you lose through that is accuracy. Sometimes what you gain through that is I never have to talk to a person because they sent me a text message and I dealt with my thing. And I like that conceptually, but we have to acknowledge that the minute you stop being an individual record and start becoming one of a 10 million cell, you will lose in the translation some of that.
Thinking about this in terms of, so the term big data is, essentially relates to kind of linking together all these different data sets you have and getting insights, right? And the commercial sector is super good at it. And I've been thinking about why they're so good at it and why we are so bad at it in government. And one of my kind of working hypotheses is that in government, we are much more cautious about it because the things we're going to do with the data have a different valence, right? Like it's fine to use big data to give you a good advertisement for a maternity bra, right? Like, and if they accidentally send Alison my maternity bra ad, which they did many times, thank you, Alison, that's fine, right? Like it's no harm, no foul. But if instead they send Alison a bill for my maternity bra, that's a problem. Yeah. And so government.
No, I understand. There's
something about how you're using it.
Commercial data is about just what you buy, right?
Well,
that's really the lens. What do you buy?
Yeah.
Where do you buy it? How often do you buy it?
Yeah.
But state government, and maybe Commonwealth as well, has a real interest in consumption of services, right?
That's true.
And so we should be, I think, using our big data to understand patterns of who needs to use what when. But I think the challenge is we don't have a good language for saying that kind of use of big data is good.
Yep.
So if you're going to then use the same data set to say, I'm going to knock on their door because I reckon they're probably not paying their water fee, then that's a different kind of valence of
also,
what you're doing,
one
right?
of them is voluntary and one of them is not. One of them is legislative. Like, I can buy my stuff wherever I want to buy my stuff.
Yes.
And it's incredibly choice-based, which is why they spend lots of money trying to harvest my data and get into my niche weird interests. But that's all terribly voluntary. Whereas what you're talking about, Caroline, are things that are really involuntary. Like that you are subjected to not making a choice for. So, I mean, I'll butcher it, but there was a quote, there's some kind of quite famous quote about civilization being built on land and birth records. So like right back to Roman times.
Yeah, governmentality. You see, like a government. Those are the two records.
Is that you need to know who owns the land and you need to know who was born and who died.
Yeah.
So these things are foundational, and they're foundational not because we're buying them, but because it's literally about the West. Like, it's literally about our democracy and our...
I don't know about democracy. Like, we
But
should
what you're
unpick,
subjected
it's
to-
about our legal system.
Yeah, our legal
right?
system.
It's about
What-
our legal framework.
What you're subjected to under law.
Yeah. But also I think there's a thing where there are things that we as government decision makers really want to know, or it's useful for us to know, but the data set is imperfect. So the one that I deal with a lot is around net internal migration. So how many people move around between states and territories in Australia? And the data set that the Bureau of Statistics use for that is your Medicare address.
I can't even, I reckon my Medicare address might be my uni housing.
I have no
When I lived
idea
in
what mine
Canberra.
is, but I've had 14 houses in the last 20 years. It could be any of those.
Well, and so I had long suspected that it was a problem for a couple of these reasons, including I'm particularly interested in the movement of people under 40.
Yeah.
Do you know who doesn't update their Medicare address, especially when it still goes to their parents' house so they'll get the mail if they absolutely need it?
Yeah. People under 40.
People under 40. And where it became, the thing that exposed how imperfect this data set was COVID vaccinations.
Of course.
Because everyone had to go online and
Yes.
update their address so that they would be eligible for the vaccination in wherever they were.
Was there mass internal net migration, Alison?
Well, that's what the data showed. And at that point, the ABS, to their credit, realised that was probably not what was actually happening.
Seeing as it was against the law in some cases to move
borders. But, you get these challenges where we really want to, it's really... GST distribution, for example, relies on this. But the data that we have isn't perfect.
And I think, like, from a lessons for the public service perspective, I guess what this whole conversation suggests to me is, A, we need to be more curious about what the data sources are. And, like, you can't just take a thing that says internal net migration and take it at face value. You have to show a little bit of interest.
Yeah, and they do apply modelling to it just to be really clear. And
No. Well, similarly, though, like, my classic that I've dealt with a lot is how many children have a disability. And I can name for you 5 different data sets that you could use for that. There's one that's collected by schools. There's how many kids are accessing something through NDIS. There's something that we use that AIHW use a sampling statistical methodology. Like, there's all sorts of different ways of counting it. For me, there's something about us knowing... I think we need to improve, like, I hate that phrase, data literacy, but I just think, like, we have to talk about it more. Like,
well, and I think we have to acknowledge the imperfection as well. So in public health, and this came up a lot in COVID, they have what they call the Swiss cheese model.
Yes.
Which is, let's say you've got interventions between the problem and the outcome. Mm-hmm. Imagine them as slices of Swiss cheese. Each slice has holes in it, right? Each intervention is not perfect. It's going to capture some, but some are going to go through the hole.
next slice.
Which is why you need multiple slices with holes in different places. So you acknowledge the imperfection by having other interventions which are also imperfect in a hope that a combination of imperfect interventions will get you somewhere when you can't possibly have a perfect intervention because you don't have perfect data or perfect understanding of the problem.
And I think part of the problem is that the people that we rely on to understand these kind of 5 or 6 different data sets are usually in the ICT teams or are occasionally in bespoke data teams.
Yep.
but they are not usually in the central policy.
No. That's exactly where I was going to go next, which is had the great fortune to work with some people who had been working with a single data set, and most of them were coming towards the end of their careers. They had been in one data set for 40 years.
Yeah, wow.
And they knew everything about the flaws, the nuances, but if you don't understand this, you can't understand that.
Yep.
And that data was really sought after by other bits of government to help them make decisions.
Yeah.
And it was really about because they didn't, their skill set wasn't in negotiating with other departments.
Yes.
Their skill set
Or
wasn't.
communicating.
Yeah. And because of that, it meant that you needed a translator. So I would never be able to get 40 years worth of knowledge on that data set, but I could stand in front and say, hold up, other agency. Yeah. And so my question is, like, how do we elevate these people? How do we send them with the data, which is what I was trying to do in that process, was say, yes, I understand it's rich and valuable for the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
But could I send...
In addition to the Excel spreadsheet.
Could I send them with the data to you, because you don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing, right? I'm not pretending I could have that much knowledge about that data set.
Yeah.
But it's like we send the data over and say, best of luck.
Yeah.
Like, bon chance.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like there are these like super smart people all through government who actually do know what the data means.
Yes.
But they're often not people who
They're not asked.
They're just not people who are very loud, is my experience.
Yeah.
And so they let the data go, and they are quite often upset about knowing that it's going to be
Misapplied.
Yeah.
Oh, completely.
And I think that's where leaders, that's where people in different roles need to start going, who knows this properly, and how do we keep them attached to the data as it keeps moving through government to get outcomes?
And so one of the striking things here about Robodebt is that it's not just imperfect data that is imperfectly matched, it's that they've then applied a rule or several rules to that data to get to an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that process of applying rules.
So I think, like, Danielle's just given us the perfect segue here, because in the workforce culture episode, Culture on the Front Lines, we heard that feedback from the Centrelink front staff who said, hey, these business manuals that codify our business rules are 90% great and 10% completely wrong. And what the people tell us is that they say, so we use it 90% of the time, and then we apply human intelligence, this lived experience, the person who actually knows, to fix it up.
Yeah.
So you gave us, Danielle, a little bit earlier some testimony from a man who'd worked on the manual PAYG process in 2015, and we're going to play for you now so this is before it's all automated. So they're trying the process, but instead of the computer spitting out the answers, they are manually taking bits from this step to this step. So they've got the imperfectly matched data and they're taking it through. Let's listen to what Mr. Simpson, that's his pseudonym, says about that.
Yeah, that's right. And so given the newness, the naivety of the scheme, there was quite substantive personal judgment involved. And we use the term eyeballing, where you would need to look at the spreadsheet and the result that had been spit out by the bespoke calculator. And there would be some circumstances where it was obvious that there was a debt under the Robodebt methodology, but other circumstances where it would be a discretionary decision on the compliance officer to make. And those were complex considerations that needed to take stock of many factors, including the nature of the client's employment, multiple employers, the financial years in which those incomes were earned, and that would be the start of some of the considerations that we made.
So let's compare this with the experience that's reported in 2019, right? So we've gone from this manual process to a much more automated process, and you start hearing whistleblowers from the casualised workforce in Centrelink saying things like, well, the team leader would say, I don't know why, just put it through. There's no questioning what the algorithm is behind this system. So
Computer says no.
That's right. So the process had lots of people, but it didn't have the wisdom of the people.
Or the delegation of the people or the authority.
Well, no, but yes, about the delegation and the authority, but I'm making the more specific point, Danielle, and back to your thing before, the casualisation of the workforce that happened between 2015 and 2019 as part of this giant rollout is that the people who were there were not performing the human knowledge and wisdom function. They were performing I'm pulling out the kind of grist that's holding up the process function, but they weren't applying that 10% to fix it.
Yeah. The application of judgment just can't be automated.
Yes, it turns out you can't just automate things. So that's my final observation is like I think we need to think about why it's so hard to automate, or we need to have a better understanding of when you can automate and make business rules do things and when you can't.
Mm. And when you need to filter out the bits that need human judgment.
Yeah, and make sure that they kind of pop out to the right, and then you need people who have judgment.
Yeah, who are empowered and their job is to check the computer and apply they've got the authority to then apply so that they are allowed to
override.
They're the override button. They're allowed to say the computer's not right here.
Yeah. All right. What a fascinating discussion about computers.
Skeptical face not welcome, Alison.
Oh, no, I was just more thinking you can tell that we grew up in the 80s.
That was the most 80s thing I could have ever said. Data. Any final thoughts on data, algorithms?
My main thing is that is the capacity to recognise that. So I don't mind automation. It makes things faster. We can do more things, but this process shows that complete blind eyeing to knowing that there are flaws. So we need to build in all of the things where we know that it won't be perfect and what humans are going to do to work around the risk of that.
And see, I think here they actually did know it wasn't going to be perfect. They just expected the recipient to be the one that identified it.
Oh, God, you've nailed it. They thought the human judgment was going to come from the recipient.
They knew it wasn't going to be perfect.
They didn't have to pay.
But they were putting the onus on the recipient to be the one that came forward and says, sorry, I think you've stuffed up my data match here. Instead of recognising.
That deeply terrifies me because when I had my second child, my first child disappeared.
I mean, I wish that had happened to me too. But
So I go to make my second child a real data set for the federal government, and I have to list whether they have siblings, and they're like, no, he doesn't. And I'm like, he does. And I end up in this argy-bargy where they are claiming my eldest child doesn't exist, and I'm saying, well, you are paying childcare benefit every week for her. You paid Medicare for her last week. I have her birth certificate. And also, she's really lively, standing right next to me, has red hair. Like, she exists. I'm not sure what's wrong with your data set, but she exists. So it took about a year to sort out. She is now a teenager and has her first job, and we tried to set up her MyGov this week and got part of it set up with her Medicare, and the tax office said, nobody of that date of birth, Medicare, and I'm like, oh my God, I think 12 years later we're back where we started. I think she's disappeared again, despite the fact that Medicare pays and whatever else. And she's saying to me, what is this? What are we doing? And I'm like, I think you've disappeared as a human to the federal government. We're going to have to start again, love.
And you're going to have to fix it.
And we're going to have to work together to fix it.
Yeah.
And so it's on her. So, she's paid tax, and so she'd like to do her tax return.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And so she's not going to be able to do that until we, again, back to the whole, so there's no way to interface. So the whole problem with all of that is one logical solution would be to physically show up somewhere with a birth certificate, a Medicare card, and a gorgeous young woman and say, here we go, we're all here. Could you make the computer match? Could you make the computer match the reality?
Yeah.
But there's no such way of doing that. So it's going to be kind of that endless. So I think this is like, where's the override? Where's the common sense part of her existence?
And because I know this about your daughter and about myself, can I strongly encourage you to investigate whether the flaw here is the hyphen in her last name?
Thank you, Alison.
Lordy Rowdy. Thank you.
that could very well turn out to be the problem.
Yep. All right. Till next time.
This podcast was recorded on Kaurna land, and we recognise Kaurna elders past and present. Always was, always will be. Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. Those of us in the employ of the state government speak in a strictly personal capacity, consistent with the Public Sector Code of Ethics that permits public servants to promote an outcome in relation to an issue of public interest, in this case, the betterment of the public service. Nothing we say should be taken as representing the views of the government or our employers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. If you want rigorous reporting on Robodebt, we recommend the work of Rick Morton at the Saturday Paper, Chris Nouse and Luc Henrique Gomez at The Guardian, Ben Eltham at Crikey, and of course, the Robodebt Royal Commission itself. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.